I saw them on the doorbell camera before they ever knocked a second time. A woman standing sideways to shield a small child from the wind, her coat pulled too tight. One arm wrapped around a backpack, already dark with rain. The storm had rolled in fast, the kind that turns streets into noise and light, into something unreliable. The radio on my kitchen counter kept repeating the same warning. Wind chill, dropping shelters over capacity. Avoid travel if possible. I was already inside, already safe, already dry, and when the motion alert chimed again, I did the worst thing I could think of. I turned the porch light off the screen, dimmed the outline of their faces, softened like a lie. I told myself that maybe they would assume no one was home. Maybe they would move on to another house with a brighter welcome, another person braver than me. The wind shook the camera, and for a moment the image blurred, then steadied again. The child looked up straight at the lens. Her cheeks were red, not crying, just tight-like. She was holding something in. She did not knock. She just spoke softly enough that I almost missed it. "Mommy says knocking is what brave people do." The words landed in my chest and stayed there. I stood still, my hand on the counter, my coat hanging untouched. The radio crackled with another update. Power out in several blocks. Emergency response delayed. I told myself I did not owe them anything, that kindness was not a requirement, that safety had limits. I told myself 100 things while the child waited. The woman checked her phone. The screen flickered, then went dark. She tapped it once, then twice. The child shifted closer to the door, pressing her small palm against the wood like she could feel the heat on the other side. I had been alone a long time, long enough to mistake quiet for peace. Long enough to believe that staying inside was the same as staying out of trouble. The camera showed their breath now, short and fast. The wind drove rain sideways. The backpack slid down the woman's shoulder, and she caught it without looking, still facing the door, still hoping I knew then that they were not asking for comfort. They were asking for survival, and I was failing them in real time. Another alert chimed on my phone. Road closures, accidents, downed lines. I thought about liability, about boundaries, about everything that let me remain motionless. The child looked back up at the camera again and tilted her head like she was listening for a response. She did not knock again. She waited. I took one step toward the door, then stopped. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass, older than I felt. Smaller, too, the porch light stayed off, and the silence stretched until it felt like a decision. I reached for the chain lock before I reached for the handle. The metal cold against my fingers, I slid the door open just enough to see them without letting the warmth spill out. The chain held firm between us. The woman straightened immediately, moving the child behind her. Instinct, sharp and practiced, I said nothing. Yet the child looked at me anyway. Her eyes steady, curious, not afraid. "Are you scared at night?" she asked, and I did not answer because the truth was, yes, I always had been the wind. Howled behind them, and the porch light stayed dark, and my hand rested on the handle, and I knew that whatever I did next would decide more than just this moment. I stood there breathing, counting the seconds, feeling the weight of the chain and the cost of keeping it in place. The door stayed cracked, the chain tight between us, a thin metal boundary that felt heavier than it should have. The woman angled her body so the child was fully behind her. Now, one hand still braced on the doorframe like she expected it to be pushed shut at any second. Her eyes moved fast, taking in the dark hallway behind me. The lock, the space my hands, she was alert, the way people get when they have learned not to trust first impressions, especially in the dark, especially in a storm like this. I could see her calculating exits, risks, distance to the next porch that still had a light on down the street. She did not step forward. She did not ask to come in. She waited, and that restraint told me more about her than any explanation could have. I cleared my throat, and the sound came out wrong. Too loud, then too quiet. I said, "I can help with the door, but I am not letting anyone inside. Not tonight. Not like this." She nodded immediately. Relief flickering across her face, not because she wanted entry, but because a rule was better than nothing. Boundaries meant predictability, and predictability meant safety. The child leaned around her hip and peered at me again, as if she were inspecting a puzzle piece that did not quite fit. She was small, maybe 6, her hair plastered to her forehead, her sneakers soaked through. She did not look scared so much as determined, like she had decided that this was the place, and now she needed to understand why it was taking so long. Mommy says doors break when the wind gets angry, she said, and then she looked up at me again. Do you get angry when things break? The question was not an accusation, it was curiosity, pure and unguarded, and it caught me off balance. I had expected fear or pleading or silence, not this strange invitation to honesty. I said sometimes, and the word tasted old. The woman let out a slow breath, like she had been holding it since the porch light went dark, she said. Thank you for opening the door. She did not add anything else. No backstory, no justification. No request beyond what had already been stated. My front door rattled as another gust slammed into it. The chain jumped once, then settled. The child flinched and then laughed just a little, like laughter was something she used to keep the world from falling apart. My mommy laughs like that too, she said quickly, like she was sharing a secret. She leaned down and whispered something in the woman's ear, and the woman shook her head but smiled despite herself. The radio inside my house crackled again. Shelter full, all cots occupied. Emergency response, delayed. The words felt closer now, less abstract. I looked at the doorframe at the swollen wood near the bottom where the rain had forced its way in. Earlier that season I said I can brace it from the outside. I have tools in the garage. I will not cross the threshold. The woman nodded again, faster this time. She said, "That is fine. That is more than fine." And she took a small step back, giving me room to work, without ever turning her back on me. The child watched everything, eyes tracking my movements like she was studying how adults solved problems. The wind pushed rain across the porch in sheets. My jacket was still on the hook inside. I did not go get it. I stepped out instead, pulling the door closed behind me so the chain went slack and the barrier between us shifted. I could feel the cold immediately biting through my shirt. The child noticed and frowned. "You will get wet," she said. I shrugged it off like it did not matter because in that moment it did not. The woman pulled the child closer, wrapping her coat around both of them. I could see the backpack strap cutting into her shoulder, raw skin beneath. She had been carrying it too long. I knelt and examined the door. The latch had loosened, screws rattled, half stripped, the frame flexed with each gust. I worked quickly narrating what I was doing, not for them, but for myself, grounding the moment. "This will hold for tonight," I said. "I am adding a temporary brace. It will not be pretty, but it will. Keep the wind out." The child nodded solemnly, as if aesthetics were the least of our concerns. She pressed her fingers into the gap between door and frame, watching the space shrink as I tightened the brace. She smiled when the whistle of wind faded. "See," she said softly, "it listens when you try." The woman looked at her with something like pride mixed with exhaustion, and for a second I saw the cost of always being the adult in the storm. I finished and stood up, my hands numb, my hair soaked. I stepped back toward my side of the door and paused. The woman said, "Thank you again." She hesitated, then added, "We do not have anywhere else safe tonight. The shelters are full. I already knew that, but hearing it out loud shifted something. I nodded slowly and said, "Stay here. I will check back in a bit." I did not promise anything else, and she did not ask. The child tilted her head again and asked, "Will you be here when it gets loud again?" I said yes before I could stop myself, and the words settled between us like a quiet agreement. I closed my door, but I did not lock it. The house felt smaller with the storm pressing in from all sides. The radio kept talking like it always did when things went wrong. Calm voices listing problems without solutions. Shelter capacity exceeded. Emergency response delayed. Avoid non-essential travel. The words repeated until they lost shape. I stood in the entryway listening to the wind batter the walls and tried to convince myself that I had done enough. The door was braced. The immediate danger reduced. That should have been the end of it. That was the logic I had lived by for years. Do what is required. Stop before it becomes personal. But the quiet afterward was heavier than the noise had been. I imagined them standing there, the woman with her shoulders squared, the child counting breaths or inventing stories to make the wind less frightening. I imagined the porch light still off the street dark except for the flicker of a distant traffic signal swaying at the intersection. I told myself that if they needed more, They would knock again, and then I realized how cruel that expectation was, asking someone already exposed to choose vulnerability one more time. I paced the living room, my phone buzzed with a weather alert. Flash flood warning in effect, roads impassable. I turned it face down like that could make the truth go away. Silence crept in. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against your ears, waiting to be filled. I poured a glass of water and forgot to drink it. My mind kept circling. The same thought: I had not said yes, and I had not said no. I had left them in the space between which felt safer for me and far more dangerous for them. I remembered a winter years earlier when my own power had gone out, and I sat in the dark, convincing myself I was fine, until the cold started to feel like a second skin. Back then, I had waited too long to ask for help. Pride, or fear, or something like it had kept me silent, and the cost had been higher than it needed to be. The radio crackled again. An update that sounded worse than the last: shelters were now closed intake, suspended until morning. I pictured the woman checking her phone, watching the battery dip lower, the child asking questions that had no good answers. I stood by the door and put my hand on the knob, then pulled it back as if it burned the rules. I lived by, lined up in my head: do not invite strangers. Do not escalate. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Each rule had protected me once, but now they felt thin, like paper against the wind. Another gust slammed the house and the frame creaked. The brace I had added held, but the sound traveled through the walls and settled in my chest. I thought of the child asking if I would be there when it got loud again. I had said yes too quickly, too easily, and now the meaning of that word expanded beyond what I had intended. Being there did not mean standing behind a closed door pretending not to hear. I realized that silence was not neutral, it was a choice, and every minute I stayed quiet was a decision to let the storm decide for all of us. I grabbed a flashlight and my jacket this time and opened the door. The cold hit hard, but it felt clarifying, like stepping into truth. The porch light stayed off for a moment longer, then I flicked it on. Its glow cut through the rain, revealing them exactly where I had left them. The woman had shifted to block the worst of the wind. The child was crouched near the door, tracing shapes in the water, pooling at her feet. They both looked up at once. Relief passed across the woman's face so quickly she tried to hide it and failed. The child smiled like she had been waiting for confirmation of something she already believed. I did not speak right away. I stood there, letting the light say what my silence had not. Then I said, "I am here." The words felt inadequate, but they were honest. The woman nodded once, not thanking me, not asking for more, just acknowledging presence. The wind roared again, louder this time, and the child flinched, then looked at me and said, "It is loud now. You said you would be here." I knelt, so we were at the same level, and said, "I am." I did not explain what that meant yet because I was still figuring it out myself. The radio inside my house kept talking, but out here it was just us and the storm and the thin line of light on the porch. I knew that whatever came next would require more than tools or money. It would require choosing to speak when silence was easier, and I understood finally that not choosing was still a choice, and it was one I could no longer make. I told her what I could do, and just as important, what I would not do. I said I could secure the door from the outside and nothing more. No entry, no stepping past the threshold, no shared space. The camera would stay on the whole time. The porch light would stay on too. She listened without interrupting her posture. Changed, not softer but steadier, like someone hearing rules they can work with. She nodded once and said that is acceptable. Then she turned to her daughter and explained it in simple words. "The man will make the door stronger from here. We stay right here." The child took this in seriously, as if it were a mission instead of a compromise. I stepped back into the rain, grabbed my tools from the garage, and came out again with the flashlight clamped between my teeth. The wind shoved at my shoulders. Rain soaked through my jacket. Within seconds, the door was older than it looked, swollen at the bottom from years of weather. The strike plate loose screws worn down from too many forced winters. I crouched low, bracing myself against the siding, and began to work. The camera lens glowed red above us, recording every movement. The woman stayed in the frame by choice, keeping her distance but never turning away. The child knelt near the threshold, pressing her fingers against the narrow gap where the cold air slipped through. She looked at me and asked if it would still be cold when I was done. I told her it would be less cold. She accepted that answer without complaint, as if honesty mattered more than comfort. I tightened the screws, slowly checking alignment, then added a temporary brace I had fashioned from scrap metal. It was not pretty, but it was solid each time the wind slammed the door. The brace held, and the sound changed from a hollow rattle to a dull thud the child noticed before anyone else. She smiled and pressed her ear to the wood, listening. "It sounds different," she said, "like it is tired now." The woman let out a breath she had been holding and said, "Thank you," in a voice that did not ask. For anything else, I finished the last adjustment and stepped back, testing the handle from outside. Firm, secure, not perfect, but enough for the night. I explained exactly what I had done and what I had not done. No surprises, no hidden help. She nodded again and asked one question. "How long will it hold?" I said through the storm, "at least until morning and likely longer." If the weather eased, she looked at the door, then at her phone, then back at me and said, "That is all we needed." The child stood and brushed her hands on her jacket, like a job well done. Then she looked up at me and asked if the door could feel brave. "Now," I said, "maybe if we let it rest." She laughed quietly. The storm continued, but the space between us felt different, contained, defined, safe. I packed my tools slowly, not because I wanted to linger, but because leaving felt like a decision that needed weight. The woman did not invite me in, and I did not ask. The boundary stood clean and mutual. Before I turned to go, the child held up a folded piece of paper she had pulled from her pocket. It was damp at the edges, but carefully kept. She asked if she could show me. I nodded, and she unfolded it just enough for me to see a drawing. 3 stick figures in front of a square with light inside. The square was a door. The light spilled out in yellow crayon. The figures were smiling. Even the tall one with a blocky shape that might have been me, I did not comment on it. She did not offer it. She simply folded it back and tucked it away, like evidence she might need. Later, the woman met my eyes and said, "We will stay here tonight," I said. "I will check the brace in the morning if you want." She considered, then said, "If you are able," I said. "I am able," and that was the agreement. No names, no numbers, no promises, beyond the next right thing. I stepped off the porch and turned back once more. The child pressed her fingers to the glass and traced the outline of the door from inside, as if memorizing it. The light above stayed on the camera, kept recording the storm, kept moving on. I walked back to my house, soaked and shivering, but steadier than I had been all night, inside. The radio still droned, but it felt distant now, like a report from another world. I sat by the window and watched the rain ease just a little. The door across the way held firm, and I realized something unexpected had happened. I had offered help without taking space, without claiming a role. I had learned what kind of help mattered to her, the kind that respected fear and logic and boundaries equally. The only help she would accept was help that did not ask her to surrender anything in return. And for the first time that night, the cold felt manageable. I did not sleep much that night, and when the storm finally thinned into a steady gray rain, I made coffee that tasted burnt and stood at the kitchen window watching their porch across the way. The light was still on the door. Still held. I told myself that was enough, that I had done what was reasonable. But another thought kept circling, one that felt efficient and clean, the way solutions used to feel before I complicated them. Money. I had it. I could end the uncertainty, quickly, cover a hotel room, replace the door properly, remove the risk without needing to show up again. That logic had worked most of my adult life when something felt messy. I paid to make it stop by mid-morning. I crossed the street with an envelope folded in my coat pocket. I knocked once and stepped back to give space. The woman opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Just as before, she looked rested but not relaxed. The child peeked from behind her leg, clutching a pencil and the same damp piece of paper from the night. Before I explained plainly that I wanted to offer help for a place to stay and repairs beyond the temporary fix, I said I could cover it. No strings, no questions. The words sounded right in my head, but as soon as they left my mouth, the air shifted. The woman did not get angry. She did not thank me. She simply shook her head once, slow and final, and said, "We cannot accept money from someone we do not know." I tried to explain that it was not charity, that it was practical. She listened patiently, then said, "That is exactly why we cannot accept it." The child looked up at her mother, then at me, as if trying to solve a puzzle. She asked if money could fix fear. Her mother answered, "Before I could know, sweetheart. Money fixes things, fear needs time." I felt exposed in a way I did not expect, like I had offered the wrong tool and been gently corrected. I nodded and stepped back, ready to apologize, but the woman surprised me by continuing. She said, "If you want to help, you already did. The door is holding and that lets us breathe tonight. That is enough." I said, "Okay," because there was nothing else to say. The child sat on the floor just inside the doorway. Drawing while we spoke, she was quiet, focused, her tongue pressed to the corner of her mouth the way children get when they are serious. When she finished, she stood and held the paper up, not to me, but to her mother. Her mother glanced at it and smiled. Then the child turned and held it out to me without crossing the threshold. This time I took it. It showed the same 3 figures as before, but clearer now. The door was bigger, the light brighter, the figures closer together above them. She had written in careful, uneven letters. We stayed. The woman watched me read it and said, "She has been drawing all morning. She draws when she feels steadier." I handed it back and thanked her for showing me. She folded it once more and tucked it into her pocket like a receipt. She might need to prove something later. I turned to leave and felt foolish with the envelope still in my pocket. I did not know what to do with it. Money suddenly felt loud and clumsy, like a shortcut that missed the point entirely back home. I sat at the table and stared at the envelope until I finally tore it up and dropped it in the trash. The pieces looked small and harmless once destroyed, but the idea behind them lingered. I had believed money could end this, 'cause money had always allowed me to leave without guilt. But guilt was not the problem this time. Distance was the child's drawing stayed with me the way it showed the door lit from the inside, not because of anything expensive, but because someone stayed. I spent the afternoon in the garage pretending to organize while actually just sitting among boxes I had not opened in years. The heater hummed and the space warmed, but it felt hollow, a place designed to keep things, not people. I found myself thinking about how quickly I had reached for money and how quickly it had been refused. Not with suspicion, but with clarity. They were not rejecting help. They were rejecting an exchange that would end the story too soon. Evening came and I crossed the street again, not with an envelope, but with my tools, to check the brace. As promised, the woman opened the door, the same careful distance, the chain still on. She thanked me for coming back, as if showing up again mattered more than what I brought. The child watched closely as I tested the door. Pressing her hand to the wood again, the gap no longer breathed cold air. She nodded, satisfied. Then she did something unexpected. She handed me the drawing fully this time and said, "You can keep it, so you remember the door." I felt my throat tighten, but I did not comment. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket like something valuable. The woman met my eyes and said, "We will be here tonight too." I said, "I will be around," and meant it in a way that surprised me as I walked back. I realized something had shifted. I had tried to end the problem with money and failed, but in failing, I had been invited into a slower solution, one that required presence, not payment. The door across the way glowed softly as the light came on again, and for the first time I understood that money would have ended it, but not in the way that mattered. It would have ended the chance to stay. I went back into the garage after sunset, not because I needed to fix anything, but because the house felt too quiet, and the garage had always been a place where I could be busy without thinking. The heater clicked on and warm air filled the space, but it did not change how empty it felt. The concrete floor was clean, the shelves organized, the boxes labeled in my own handwriting, a system built to keep control. I moved from shelf to shelf, touching things I had not touched in years. A folded tarp, a box of extension cords, an old cooler from trips. I barely remembered everything useful, everything stored away, nothing alive. I told myself I would check the brace one more time later, but for now I sat on an overturned crate and listened to the heater hum. The sound reminded me of waiting rooms, places designed to keep people comfortable without letting them stay long. My eyes landed on a large box pushed against the back wall. The tape was yellowed, the marker faint. I knew what it was before I reached it. And still, I pretended not to. I pulled it forward and cut the tape carefully like it might resist inside were smaller boxes wrapped in newspaper, brittle with age. I lifted the first one and dust rose into the warm air. I sneezed and laughed quietly at myself when I opened it. The smell hit me, paper and wood, and something sweet I could not place. There were toys inside, not many a small truck with a missing wheel. A book with pages taped together, a pair of mittens no longer matching. I sat back on the crate and held the truck in my hand. The plastic was worn smooth from being pushed across floors, long gone. I did not think about that boy often anymore, not because I did not care, but because I had learned to keep him in a place that stayed closed. I had built a life around never opening that box again. Yet here I was with the heater running and the night settling in outside, realizing the space had never been meant to be warm. It had been meant to keep things frozen exactly as they were, so I could walk past without noticing. I put the truck down and opened another box. This one held drawings, crayon lines, bright and crooked suns in corners, stick figures smiling too wide. I recognized the handwriting of my own name on the backs dated years ago. I felt a pressure in my chest and stood up to pace the garage. The heater kept working, but it did not reach the place that mattered across the way. The porch light came on again, visible through the small window, and I stopped pacing to watch it. The light was not bright. It did not spill far, but it was steady. I thought about the drawing the child had given me and how she had drawn the door from the inside. Bright because someone stayed, not because something expensive had been added. I looked back at the open box and understood why I had reached for money earlier. Money would have allowed me to close the door again, to return to this space and keep it untouched. Money would have kept the past in its box and the present at a distance, but the child had refused it, and in doing so had forced me to sit with this warmth that was only physical and this cold that was not. I sat again and picked up the mittens. They were small, stiff with age. One had a tear at the thumb, repaired clumsily with thread that did not match. I had sewn it myself late one night when I did not know how else to help. I closed my eyes and the memory came uninvited, not dramatic, just ordinary. A kitchen table, a cup of cooling coffee, a small hand resting trustingly on my wrist. I opened my eyes and the garage was the same, but I was not the same. The space had been warm enough for tools and boxes, but never for grief, never for remembering. Without rushing past it, I realized that I had been living that way for years, keeping my house clean, my schedule full, my relationships thin enough to manage. I told myself it was peace, but it was only quiet, the kind that asks nothing and gives nothing back. My phone buzzed in my pocket and startled me. It was a weather alert, nothing urgent, just an update. I thought about the woman and the child settling in for the night, checking the door once more, maybe drawing again, maybe listening to the rain. I wondered if they felt safer knowing someone would come back, not because he paid, but because he stayed. I packed the boxes back carefully, not sealing them, just closing the flaps as if I might open them again soon before turning off the heater. I stood in the middle of the garage and let the warmth reach me. It felt different now, less like waiting and more like preparation. When I went back inside the house, felt larger, less closed off. I turned on a lamp I usually left dark and sat at the table with the drawing folded beside me. I did not know what would happen next. I only knew that the space I had never kept warm was no longer just the garage. It was something inside me, and warming it would take more than money. It would take showing up again and again, even when there was nothing to fix. I had avoided names for years because names invite questions, and questions invite staying, and staying requires a kind of courage. I did not think I had any more. When the woman asked if I had children, she did not press. Her voice was calm and practical, the way people speak when they respect boundaries. I said no at first, then corrected myself and said, "Not here," which was true in a way that felt dishonest. The child looked up at me as if she had heard the space between my words and decided to step into it. She asked what his name was, and the garage seemed to inhale around us. I did not answer right away. I focused on the brace on the door and the quiet click of cooling metal. The woman did not repeat the question. She stood still, giving me room, and that restraint mattered more than sympathy ever could. I finally said his name once, only softly as if volume could reopen wounds. The sound of it surprised me. It had weight and shape, and the child repeated it carefully, not mocking, not prying, just learning. How it fit in her mouth! The woman nodded once and thanked me for telling her, and then she changed the subject to the weather, to schedules, to the practical things that keep people upright. The child, however, held the name like a small stone, turning it over and asked where he was. Now I told the truth without decoration. I said he was gone and that I had learned how to live with that sentence by not saying it aloud. She considered this and then said something that did not feel like advice. She said her grandmother said, "Names are doors, and if you never open them, the room forgets. It is part of the house." I felt something crack, not loudly, just enough to let air in. The woman reached for her child's shoulder and apologized, but I shook my head because it was not an offense, it was a mirror. I realized I had kept that room locked so long that even I had started to believe it was storage and not a place someone once lived. We finished the work quietly and the door held firm. The wind pressed and failed. And the child smiled, like the world had done what it promised for once. Before they left, she handed me the drawing again and pointed to the 3 figures and said, "This one is you, but only if you want to be." I did not answer because wanting felt dangerous. But after they walked down the path and the porch light caught the rain, I said the name again inside the empty house, and this time it did not echo like loss. It sounded like memory, which is a different kind of ache, one that can be carried. I put the drawing on the table and left it there overnight, and when I woke, I did not move it away. I made coffee and said the name once more just to see if the room would remember that it belonged to the house, and it did. The sound came later after the door held, and after the wind moved on, and after the house settled back into the familiar quiet that usually meant safety to me. But that night, quiet felt unfinished. I was rinsing my hands at the sink when I heard it again. Faint at first, then clearer. A thin melody drifting from the sidewalk, the child was humming. Not a song meant for performance, not even one sung correctly. It was uneven and missing pieces, the way children sing when they are tired and cold and trying to be brave. The tune slipped through the walls and into the room I had locked for years, and I knew it because my body reacted before my mind did. My chest tightened, my hands shook, and the glass rattled softly in the cabinet. I turned off the water and stood there listening because stopping it would require movement, and movement would require a decision I was not ready to make. The woman spoke quietly, telling her child it was late, but the child kept humming just a little longer as if finishing something important. The melody was close to a lullaby. My mother used to hum when the heat went out, and she wrapped me in a blanket and told me stories about places we would go someday. I had forgotten the words, but the shape of the song was the same, and it broke through the careful order I kept. Like ice cracking on a river, I went to the door and opened it fully. This time, no chain, no half measures. They were still there waiting politely. The woman looked surprised but did not step back or forward. She let me choose the distance. The child stopped humming when she saw me and smiled as if she had been practicing patience, and it finally paid off. I asked if they were warm enough, and the woman said they would manage, and that answer hurt more than if she had said no. The child asked if I liked her song. I tried to answer, but my voice failed, and that was the moment I understood. Control is not the absence of emotion. It is the illusion that you can choose when it arrives. I nodded and she started again, softly. Closer now, the notes wobbled and I felt tears come without warning, without drama. Just gravity doing what it does when support is removed. I did not hide it because I was too tired to pretend, and because no one reached for me, no one tried to fix it. The woman simply stayed where she was, and the child kept humming as if this was allowed, as if adults were permitted to fall apart sometimes and be witnessed. I sat on the step and put my head in my hands and let the sound wash over me until it emptied the room. I had sealed. The sound did not heal anything that night. It did not make promises. It did not rearrange the past. It simply made space for what had been trapped, and that was enough. When the child finished, she asked if I was okay, and I told the truth. I said not yet, and she nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. The woman asked if there was anything they could do, and I said no, and then surprised myself by adding, "Thank you for staying." They left soon after because the night was cold, and boundaries still mattered, but the sound stayed with me. It followed me inside and into sleep, and when I woke before dawn, the house felt different, not warmer, not happier, just more honest. I made tea and sat with the drawing and listened to the quiet that now included a memory of song, and I realized breaking is not the same as ending. Sometimes it is the first honest movement toward repair. The night did not end with music or apologies or anything neat. It ended with work, the quiet kind that does not feel brave at the time, but counts later. I stayed up after they left, sitting at the table with the radio low, listening to updates about roads reopening and shelters still full, and I realized hiding had been my habit. Not just from others, but from myself. I told myself I was careful, that I believed in boundaries, that I preferred solitude, but the truth was simpler. I did not want to be seen, because being seen meant being measured against a standard. I no longer trusted myself to meet that night. I decided to stop pretending I was neutral. I wrote down what had happened, not to explain it away, but to fix it in reality. I noted the time, the weather, the fact that I turned the porch light off, and why I did it. I wrote the sentence without softening it. I was afraid, and I chose myself first. Seeing the words made them heavier, but also clearer. I then wrote what I could do that did not require, promises I could not keep. I listed small things, practical things I could do the next day. I could check the door again in daylight. I could call a repair shop and ask about parts. I could leave a number in case the latch failed again. I could ask permission before offering help. I could listen more than I spoke. I slept for a few hours and woke before dawn to a text from an unknown number. It was the woman she wrote that the door held and thanked me for fixing it, and added a photo of the child, asleep with her coat still on the message. Did not ask for anything. It did not pull me forward. It simply closed a loop, and I felt relief and responsibility arrive together. I replied with a short message telling her I was glad and that I would call a repair shop after sunrise, and asked if it was okay to coordinate with her landlord. She answered yes and thanked me again, and that was it. No heart emojis, no expectation, just coordination. The day moved slowly. I made the call's ordered parts and scheduled a time. I told the shop to call her directly for access. I kept myself out of the middle, where control can masquerade as care. That evening I went for a walk and passed houses with lights on and doors shut, and realized how often I had mistaken distance for virtue. Later that night, another message came from the same number the child had drawn. Something and wanted me to see it. There was a photo attached. 3 figures stood under a bright porch light. One tall, one small one. In between, the door was closed, but the light was on, and the words at the top said, "Santa did not forget us. He just came late." I laughed out loud alone in my kitchen, and then I cried again. Not from pain this time, but from a strange release, because the sentence did not demand belief. It allowed time. It allowed arrival after delay. It allowed repair without erasing what came before. I wrote back, thanking them, and said the drawing was beautiful and that I would bring extra screws tomorrow in case the frame needed it the next morning. The repair went smoothly. I stood outside while the tech worked and spoke only when asked. The woman kept a careful distance, and I respected it. The child watched from inside, pressing her hand to the glass to feel the vibration. When the drill started, she smiled. When it ended, the door closed cleanly. The latch caught. The porch light came on automatically at dusk and stayed on. I did not linger. I left a card with my name and number and said to call if anything failed later that night. As I sat alone, I realized I had stopped hiding, not because I had confessed everything, but because I had chosen actions that matched the truth. I could live with. No speeches, no vows, just presence measured and repeatable. And for the first time in a long while, the quiet felt earned. Nothing miraculous happened after that, and I want to say that clearly, because stories like to rush toward light and call it destiny, but this one did not do that. The next days were ordinary in the way that tests intention. I went to work, answered emails, paid bills, and cooked dinners that left one pan dirty longer than it should have. The weather warmed just enough to turn the snow to slush, and the street looked tired instead of dramatic. I checked my phone too often, wondering if I would hear from them again, and then reminding myself that waiting can turn care into pressure. So I stopped checking and focused on what was in front of me. 2 days later, I received a short message. The landlord had approved the repair invoice and thanked me for coordinating. That was all. No smiley face, no story attached, just information, and I replied, "You are welcome," and meant it. That evening, I drove past their block by accident, or maybe not, and noticed the porch light was on. Before dusk, the door looked straight in. Its frame and the steps were clear of ice. I kept driving because stopping would have turned the moment into something else. A week went by, and then another. The silence did not feel like rejection. It felt like space, the kind you earn by not filling it with need. One afternoon, I got a call from the number again. The latch was fine, the woman said, but the weather strip had started to peel and asked if I knew who to call. I gave her the number of the same shop and offered to drop off adhesive if that helped. She said yes and thanked me, and that was the entire conversation when I arrived. I left the adhesive in a bag on the step and knocked. Once, then stepped back. She opened the door enough to see me and nodded. The child peeked around her leg and said hi, and I said hi back. And that was it. No hugging, no speeches, just acknowledgement and boundaries respected. I walked back to my car feeling steadier than I had in months because restraint had become a form of care. Over the next week, small tasks appeared like pebbles on a path, a loose hinge, a bulb burned out, a storm. Warning that made me text a reminder to bring plants inside. I always asked before acting and accepted no without argument. Sometimes the answer was no, and I said, okay. Sometimes it was yes, and I followed through without making it a favor. The child continued to draw and once sent a photo of a picture taped to the fridge. It showed the porch light as a sun and the door as a rectangle with a heart inside. I replied that I liked the colors and nothing more, because praise can turn into performance if you let it. The woman stayed careful and I stayed consistent, and something quiet formed that did not need a name. Neighbors began to notice, not me exactly, but the light, the door-the-way repairs happened, without drama. One Saturday, a man down the street asked if I knew a good locksmith, and I gave him the same number I had used, and that was how it spread. Not heroism, just information. The weather turned again and the block organized. A fix-it morning. People brought coffee and tools, and no one asked who started it because no one needed to claim it. I showed up early, set up a table with screws and tape, and left it there. The woman came with the child later and worked on a loose railing with another neighbor. She did not look at me for permission. She did not need it, and that felt right. Afterward, we stood apart eating donuts and talking about nothing important. The child asked my name again, and I told her, and she tried to spell it with powdered sugar on the table and laughed when it did not fit. I laughed too and wiped the table clean. Nothing miraculous happened, but something durable did. When evening came, the porch lights along the street came on one by one, not coordinated, just habit, and I realized how much I had confused miracles with endings. What mattered was the middle, the repetition, the choosing again without applause. The woman texted that night to say thank you for today, and I replied, thank you for coming the balance. Felt right. Weeks later, she asked if it was okay to call if the door acted up during a storm. I said yes and added that if she needed another number besides mine, I could share one. She said my number was fine, and that was the closest thing to trust spoken aloud. That we had allowed the seasons, shifted work, stayed busy, and the story did not turn into romance or rescue or anything cinematic. It turned into showing up when asked and stepping back when not asked, and in that rhythm, I felt my life widen quietly. Not because I had been forgiven, but because I had learned how to act without hiding and without demanding credit. Nothing miraculous happened, and that was the miracle. Showing up became a habit in the quiet way. Habits form, not announced, not tracked, just repeated until they shaped the day I stopped thinking about whether I should be there and started thinking about whether I had been asked. And when the answer was yes, I went. And when it was no, I stayed home and let the house settle around me. The woman began to text short updates, not invitations, just information. The latch held during the last storm. The heater clicked but worked. The child lost a mitten and found it again. Each message carried a small, ordinary relief, and I learned to reply with the same tone. No extra meaning attached. The block felt different too. Not brighter exactly. Just steadier. People waved, more often stopped to talk about trash pickup schedules or whose dog had learned a new trick. The fix-it mornings continued once a month without a name. Someone brought folding chairs. Someone else brought muffins. and the work moved from house to house like a shared breath. I fixed what I knew and deferred what I did not, and wrote numbers on scrap paper and handed them over, and that was enough. The child began to greet me by name when she saw me across the street, and sometimes she ran over and sometimes she did not, and both felt fine. She asked questions that were not heavy. What time? The ice cream truck came back in summer. Why the moon followed the car. How doors knew when to close. I answered what I could and admitted when I did not know, and she accepted that easily, as if uncertainty were a normal thing. Which it is, the woman stayed careful in the ways that mattered. She kept plans clear and doors closed at night, and never asked for anything that would blur lines. I respected that because care without respect is just appetite. One afternoon, she asked if I could look at a window that rattled in the wind. I said yes and went over with shims and caulk and worked from the outside while she held the frame from within. The glass was cold under my hands and the street smelled like rain. Child pressed her palms to the pane to test the seal and smiled when the sound stopped. It was a small victory measured in decibels and comfort. Not applause when I finished. I packed my tools and said I would send the invoice to the landlord. She nodded and thanked me and handed me a bottle of water. And that was the exchange. Later that week. I noticed my own porch light flicking on earlier than before, not out of fear, but out of habit. The house felt less like a bunker and more like a place people passed by and recognized. I left a note on my door with the locksmith number during a storm and came home to find someone had added a second number beneath it. The list grew and I let it because this was not mine to curate. It belonged to the block. The child drew less often, but when she did, she taped pictures to the window facing the street, a ladder, a mailbox, a light with rays. I did not ask what they meant because asking can make symbols stiff. Sometimes it is better to let them breathe. Summer came. With its noise and heat, and the work shifted from doors to fans and shade cloth and water timers. The woman asked once if I could help her carry a table from a neighbor who was moving. I said yes, and we carried it together, counting steps and laughing. When the leg caught on the curb, the child walked ahead, narrating like a tour guide, and the table made it inside without drama afterward. We sat on the steps and drank lemonade and talked about nothing important, the kind of talk that builds trust without asking for it. When fall returned, the fix-it morning turned into a fix-it afternoon and then into a potluck because people wanted to linger, and I noticed how my presence had changed, not central, not invisible, just reliable, and that word mattered to me more than any other I had chased being needed before, and it had made me brittle. Reliability made me calm one evening. The woman asked if it would be okay to call if she was late coming home and the porch light was out. I said yes and meant it as a practical thing, not a promise to save anyone. Just a willingness to answer the phone. The call never came, but the asking mattered. The child started school and waved from the bus window, and I waved back, and then I went to work, and the day continued, because life does that. It continues and tests whether you will keep the habits you say you value. Winter crept in again, and the first snow came early and heavy, and I was out shoveling when the woman stepped onto her porch with a thermos and set it on the rail and went back inside. Without a word, I took a cup and drank and left the thermos where it was, and later it was gone, and that was the entire ceremony. The child called my name from the doorway and asked if the door would be okay tonight, and I said yes because it would be, and because saying yes had become a truthful thing. Showing up became a habit, and the habit built something that did not require speeches or miracles, just time. The door I no longer lock is not a statement, and it is not brave, and it is not careless. It is a result, the kind that forms after enough ordinary days, stack quietly on top of each other until the weight changes how you move. I still lock it at night when storms are bad and when I am away and when the block feels unsettled, but on evenings like this one, when the air is calm and the streetlight hums and the sound of dishes drifts from a few houses down, I leave it resting against the frame, not wide open, not closed, just there, because the difference matters. The neighborhood holds a small gathering once a year. Now, not a festival, just tables pulled together and a grill borrowed from whoever has room, and children weaving between legs with chalk dust on their hands, and adults trading recipes and weather predictions. I arrive with nothing to announce and something to do, and that is enough. The woman stands near the steps with a bowl of salad, and the child is older now, taller, louder, smarter in ways. That surprised me. She runs up and asks if the door at my place still makes the soft click when it settles, and I tell her, yes, and she nods like a mechanic, satisfied with a test. She brings me a paper napkin with a drawing on it, a light over a door, a small hand reaching for the knob, and she says she made it because it looked like today. I tuck it into my pocket without ceremony. Later, I will put it with the others, not framed, not precious, just kept the grill flares, and someone laughs and the conversation shifts to nothing important. Which is the point? Someone mentions the first storm last year and how the power stayed on and how the latch held, and there is a small ripple of shared memory that passes without landing on any one person. I notice how my body feels in this moment, not tight, not scanning, not waiting to leave, just present. The woman catches my eye and raises her glass, and I raise mine, and we both look away because meaning does not need witnesses after the plates are cleared and the chairs folded. I walk home with the sound of the block settling behind me. The street is damp, and the porch lights glow like a line of breathing. I reach my door and pause. Not because I am afraid, but because I remember the night I turned the light off and how easy it was to pretend I had not seen anything. I remember the sound of the wind in the camera and the small voice that did not ask for anything and how my hand hovered and how shame feels like heat and how relief feels like air. The lock is still there and I touch it and leave it resting. The door settles with the soft click the child likes and the house exhales. I put the napkin drawing on the table and make tea and sit where the light falls, and I let the quiet be kind. The phone buzzes, once a message from the woman saying, "Thank you for today." Nothing else, and I reply, "You are welcome and mean the whole block, not myself." The kettle clicks off and I pour, and the steam rises, and I think about what belonging looks like when it is earned and not declared. It looks like showing up when asked and stepping back when not. It looks like fixing what you can and admitting what you cannot. It looks like a door that rests against the frame, because trust is not a switch, it is a habit. I wash the cup and leave it to dry, and I turn off the lamp and walk to the door one last time and check the weather and the street, and I leave it as it is, not to invite the world in, but to remind myself I am part of it. Some doors are fixed, some are opened. Mine did both. Sometimes a story is not really about a door or a storm or even a man who almost turned away. Sometimes it is about the moments we do not talk about, the ones we replay quietly when the house is empty and the lights are low. Most of us have had at least one night when we heard a knock we did not answer. Not because we were cruel, but because we were tired, scared, unsure, or convinced that staying silent was safer than getting involved. Life teaches us early that silence can protect us, but it rarely tells us what silence costs. This story was never meant to make anyone feel guilty. It was meant to remind us that we are human, and being human means failing first more often than we admit. It means turning the porch light off sometimes. It means choosing comfort over courage. And yet it also means that failure does not have to be the final chapter. What matters is not the moment we looked away, but the moment we decided to look back. Many people watching this have lived long enough to know that real change does not arrive with dramatic speeches or perfect timing. It arrives quietly. It arrives through showing up when no one is keeping score. It arrives through small repairs that no one applauds. A tightened hinge, a replaced lock, a light left on night after night. These are not heroic acts. They are acts of presence. And presence repeated over time becomes trust. Trust becomes safety. Safety becomes belonging. That is how real families are built, not through grand promises, but through consistency. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, it may be because it touched something familiar. Perhaps you recognized yourself in the hesitation, or in the fear of doing the wrong thing, or in the quiet wish that someone had shown up for you once when you needed it most. Maybe you have been the person standing in the storm hoping someone would answer. Or maybe you have been the one inside listening to the wind, telling yourself that staying out of it was the wiser choice. Either way, this story is an invitation, not a lesson. An invitation to notice the next moment when a small choice matters. An invitation to believe that it is not too late to be someone who stays. Here we tell stories like this not because they are perfect, but because they are honest. Stories where people stumble, hesitate, and learn slowly. Stories where love grows from presence, not pressure. Where healing happens through action, not miracles. where doors are fixed, lights are left on, and trust is earned one day at a time. If you are someone who values stories that respect your life experience, that do not rush emotions, that understand how complicated real goodness can be, then you are in the right place. This channel exists for people who know that the most meaningful changes happen quietly after the storm passes when no one is watching. If you would like to stay with us for more stories like this, stories about second chances, about ordinary courage, about people who fail and then choose to do better, you are always welcome to subscribe. Not because we promise happy endings, but because we promise honest ones. And if you are leaving this video carrying even a small thought, maybe just one question you had not asked yourself before, then this story has already done what it was meant to do. Somewhere tonight, a porch light will stay on a little longer. Somewhere, a door will be opened that might have stayed closed, and somewhere, someone will decide that silence is no longer the choice they want to make. Thank you for staying until the end. We will be here when you are ready for the next story.